Hey guys, back with another Borderlands 2 video, and today I thought we could do a crossover type countdown video where I talk about some of the guns that appear in both Borderlands 1 and 2. However, go over which Borderlands 2 guns were actually better in Borderlands 1. Now before we start, I'm going to be ranking some of these based on how much better I think the Borderlands 1 version is compared to the Borderlands 2 version. But with this said, just because a weapon is on this particular list doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad in Borderlands 2, it's just that I think that particular weapon was better in the first Borderlands. But without further ado, these will be the top 10 Borderlands 2 guns that were better in Borderlands 1, starting now. Number 10, the Volcano. Okay, so I've got to admit that I actually like the Volcano from Borderlands 2. The main reason for that is because the Volcano is a pretty nice sniper rifle for Axton, provided you have enough grenade damage bonus. I'd also say it's one of the more forgiving sniper rifles in the sense that you can get both great body shot and good critical hit damage out of it. At the same time though, the Volcano's Achilles heel is that it has reduced base damage when compared to other similar Maliwan sniper rifles like the Maliwan Snider. The superior base damage of the Maliwan Snider is the main reason why the Volcano simply underperforms on criticals with the vast majority of the other characters in Borderlands 2. And it sucks because I think if the base damage of the Volcano was simply on par with the Maliwan Snider, the Volcano would be way better. The Volcano from Borderlands 1 doesn't actually get a damage decrease, and that's one of the main reasons I would say that it's better than the Borderlands 2 version. So if you manage to get a purple rarity Maliwan Sniper in Borderlands 1 that is in Fire Element, it should always have inferior damage to the Volcano. Hopefully, Gearbox ditches the name Magma from the pre-sequel, and we get back to calling it the Volcano for Borderlands 3. Number 9, the Hornet. Okay, so the Hornet is another really nice weapon from Borderlands 2. In fact, it's probably the best of the corrosive legendary pistols that are available in Borderlands 2, and it's arguably the first possible legendary that you can acquire as well. My only real complaint with the Hornet in Borderlands 2 is that it tends to consume a lot of ammo as a result of the 6-round burst, especially if you have the twin prefix version, which consumes 2 ammo per shot. But otherwise, the Hornet from Borderlands 2 is still a pretty great gun across all of the characters. With this said, the Borderlands 1 Hornet is probably better. I suppose one of the big reasons for that is because Borderlands 1's equivalent of slag is corrosive, and having a good corrosive weapon that deals a decent amount of damage is always a good thing. As far as ammo consumption is concerned, while it's not necessarily the strongest variant, the Hornet accessory can appear on the Dove pistol, creating the Dove-Hornet hybrid, and this basically gives the Hornet infinite ammo, which is an awesome feature if you're looking for a weapon to have for some corrosive tagging. While it seems unlikely that we will get the original Hornet from Borderlands 1, complete with the possibility for it to randomly have infinite ammo, the original Hornet was a lot cooler because of that specific trait. Hopefully, the Hornet will return in Borderlands 3. Number 8, the Hellfire. Okay, once again, the Hellfire by no means is a bad weapon in Borderlands 2. While there are definitely other SMGs out there like the Sandhawk, Bitch, and Tattler that are stronger, the Hellfire is still a pretty great legendary weapon. Like the original Borderlands, the Hellfire comes in fire only, and a significant portion of its overall DPS potential comes from the burn effects that it can apply to enemies. This may limit it somewhat in higher difficulties simply because the health regeneration of enemies is so high, but still the projectile damage is pretty good, and provided that you've got the proper build, the Hellfire is still a pretty excellent SMG. Ultimately, I think that between the pre-sequel Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 1, the Hellfire is probably at its best in the original game, simply for the fact that the damage over time is pretty high and should make short work of most fire-vulnerable enemies. That said, I do have to admit that Borderlands 1's balance at higher levels is generally a little more forgiving than it is in Borderlands 2, and that's because you don't really have to deal with a bunch of health regeneration like you would in Borderlands 2, so you can take better advantage of the Hellfire's damage over time effects in Borderlands 1. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Hellfire will be in Borderlands 3. It's a classic weapon, and I'm curious to see if the Borderlands 3 version will be more like the original, or if it will be more like the one we've seen in Borderlands 2. Number 7, the Chopper. Now, Borderlands 2 added the chopper as a part of the Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt DLC. In general, the chopper is a pretty cool idea for a weapon. The problem is that the chopper is simply too expensive and too impractical to use on most characters, with the exception of Salvador. Salvador has ammo regeneration and skills like Inconceivable, which allow the player to fire shots that don't consume ammo. Between both of these abilities, Salvador can actually make the chopper work, and while you may still have some issues running out of ammo, it's nowhere near as bad as the chopper is on all of the other characters in the game. It's also BS that the chopper is acquired by farming Deciduous the Invincible, so you're basically getting a gun that has a 5 out of 6 chance of not being able to work well on your character, and you have to farm a boss that is really hard to kill. While the chopper is fairly similar in the original Borderlands, you have the advantage of not having ammo regeneration being locked to just one character. Not only are there specific legendary weapons like the TDR Guardian that allow the player to regenerate combat rifle ammo independent of skills or class mods, but you also have specific class mods for Roland which allow the player to regenerate combat rifle ammo. And failing that, Lilith has skills that allow the player to fire shots that don't consume ammo. I guess this is a personal opinion, but I also like the look of the chopper in the original Borderlands a lot more than the chopper from Borderlands 2, which looks like this blue rarity generic bandit assault rifle. If the chopper returns in Borderlands 3, I think all the characters need a way to regenerate ammo for it, or the ammo consumption needs to be lowered from 6 to 4. Number 6, the Striker. So the Striker shotgun in Borderlands 2 is kind of mediocre. While it has great ammo consumption and deals okay damage, the problem is the ridiculous amount of recoil and the small magazine size. The most important aspect of a sniper-type weapon in a Borderlands game is that recoil is relatively low, or at the very least manageable, so you can consistently perform critical hits. However, with the Striker, that's not that easy. While the Striker won't set the world on fire in the original Borderlands game, I think the Striker is simply better in Borderlands 1 because you're not confined to having a low magazine size, and you can find versions with very manageable or even very low recoil. And while I suppose the Striker from Borderlands 2 better fulfills the idea of a sniper shotgun, I think the Striker from Borderlands 1 makes a better close to mid-range headshot shotgun. If the Striker makes it into Borderlands 3, I just hope they increase the magazine size, maybe boost the base damage a little bit, and add 1 or 2 more projectiles. And put more simply, I just hope they combine both the Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2 versions together with none of the drawbacks. Number 5, the Skull Masher. Now, at one time, the Skull Masher may have arguably been the best sniper rifle in Borderlands 2. Of course, this would have been like almost 4 years ago, before the Pimpernel was introduced to the game, and before Gearbox nerfed the B-Shield. After all, a sniper rifle that fires 5 or so projectiles would have had way more damage potential with the B than most of the other more conventional sniper rifles in this game. Ever since, the Skull Masher has largely been forgotten. I would venture to say that most people probably prefer either a Jacobs Muckamuck or Jacobs Diab Sniper over the Skull Masher simply because it's so difficult to get all 5 or so projectiles to hit an enemy's crit spot. The original Skull Masher could actually fire 6 projectiles as opposed to 5, and because Borderlands 1's overall balance isn't as crazy as Borderlands 2's, I think you'll find that the Skull Masher in the original Borderlands tends to perform a lot better. But what I will say though is that I really like the fudgeability, or how you didn't have to be super precise to deal damage with the Skull Masher in Borderlands 2. And this ability may actually be a little more useful in the original Borderlands, thanks in large part to how sniper rifles as a whole are less accurate than they were in Borderlands 2. So having a sniper that allows the player to have some level of fudge room is pretty great if you ask me. I guess to be fair to Borderlands 2's Skull Masher, it was great at one time, and if character optimization and min-maxing weren't so important for Borderlands 2's UVHM and OP8 difficulties, then I think the Skull Masher would be a lot better than it currently is. Number 4. Sledge's Shotgun. Sledge's shotgun in Borderlands 2 is one of the more underwhelming legendary shotguns. While I guess it's not absolutely horrible and it can come in all elements, I think the weapon itself leaves something to be desired. I suppose as an example, would you rather have Sledge's shotgun, or would you rather have the Ravager, Triquetra, Slowhand, Slow Explosion, Conference Call, or Interfacer? While I suppose you could make a case for why the Deliverance, Flakker, and Striker are also bad, at least all three of those guns have pretty neat gimmicks. After all, the Striker is a sniper shotgun, the Deliverance flies towards targets while shooting them in the face, and the Flakker is a portable flak cannon. So compared to all of the other legendaries, what is so special about Sledge's shotgun? Now, in Borderlands 1, while Sledge's shotgun wasn't the best shotgun in the game, it at least had some unique and interesting things going for it. As an example, the special effect provided by Sledge's shotgun was that the weapon provided some knockback potential, which was great for temporarily stunning enemies so you could kill them with a grenade or another weapon. I think you have to admit that if Sledge's shotgun in Borderlands 2 also had knockback, it would be far better than it currently is. And if Sledge's shotgun comes back in Borderlands 3, I hope they bring back the knockback, because knockback is always fun. Number 3, the Unforgiven. Now, the Unforgiven is both one of the most frustrating and counterintuitive weapons in the entire game. Unlike most Jacob's weapons that fire as fast as you can pull the trigger, the Unforgiven from Borderlands 2 specifically will not allow you to fire as fast as you can pull the trigger. While I guess I understand that the designers were ultimately trying to go with a gun that is more like a hand cannon, complete with high base and critical hit damage, these traits made this weapon really difficult to use effectively, especially when you have other weapons like the Maggie, which are like pistol shotguns that deal awesome amount of damage, and they don't have restrictions on how fast you can fire them. The original Unforgiven at its core was far simpler than Borderlands 2's Unforgiven. While it did decrease fire rate and increase recoil, the Unforgiven still boosted damage and critical damage, but could spawn with masher weapon accessories that would make it fire like the Maggie does in Borderlands 2. So I guess try to imagine a Maggie that's more powerful, fires slightly slower, but can still fire at a respectable speed without a ridiculous amount of skills or other pieces of gear needed to boost the fire rate. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing is simply that the Unforgiven from Borderlands 1 just has better fire rate, and it makes the weapon far easier and a lot more fun to use, in my personal opinion. If the Unforgiven pearlescent returns in Borderlands 3, I would like it if they just made it a slightly more powerful version of the Maggie. Or maybe there could be two different Unforgiven barrels, where one is like a masher and the other is more like your standard hand cannon. Sort of like we've seen with the Fibber's crit, shotgun, and ricochet barrels in Borderlands 2. Number 2, the Cobra. The Cobra. That gun I've only seen drop once or twice in Borderlands 2. I guess while it's true that Gearbox buffed the drop rate about a year or two ago, this weapon almost never actually drops. Props to anyone that farmed for the Cobra before Gearbox fixed the drop rate, because I can pretty much guarantee that the Cobra is far rarer than the vast majority of legendaries in Borderlands 2. And if you ask me, most of the hype surrounding the Cobra from Borderlands 2 is because it's so rare. And while it isn't the worst sniper in the game, it is definitely lacking in some areas. First and foremost, it's a bolt-action sniper rifle, which means that you have to wait a while in between shots. And the second thing is that the Cobra isn't even technically an explosive sniper rifle. While it deals explosive damage, it doesn't receive damage boosts from the explosive relic. Unlike the Borderlands 2 version, the Borderlands 1 Cobra is a legendary weapon, and while it looks kind of like all of the other Torg legendaries from the first Borderlands, I have to admit that I really like the slick black appearance of the original Cobra. Functionally speaking, the original Cobra isn't a bolt action, so in my book, that alone makes it far superior to the remade version for Borderlands 2. It's also worth mentioning that the Cobra in the original Borderlands is also an actual explosive sniper rifle, complete with its very own explosive capacitor. This also puts the original Cobra ahead of the Cobra from Borderlands 2, and the Borderlands 1 Cobra is what the Borderlands 2 Cobra should have been. Even if it was going to be a Tiny Tina weapon and they changed the red text, it should have functionally stayed the same in my personal opinion. So if the Cobra returns, my hope is that it's the Borderlands 1 version. Number 1, the Ogre. So the Ogre is one of those guns in Borderlands 2 that just leaves a lot to be desired. While I wouldn't say it's an awful weapon by any means, my main issue with the Borderlands 2 Ogre is that it isn't nearly as powerful as I might like, and the Ogre is fairly difficult to get. You have to kill a specific enemy known as Warlord Slog, who only spawns during the badass round for the Magic Slaughterdome in the Dragon Keep DLC for Borderlands 2. So at the very least, acquiring an Ogre can place the player in an extremely stressful situation. On the flip side, the Ogre from Borderlands 1 doesn't necessarily have a designated drop. However, I think it's a better weapon overall. Regular versions of the Ogre have more immediate fire upon pulling the trigger and are fairly strong against most enemies. Even if you can't get the best Ogre in Borderlands 1, you can still wreck most of whatever is in front of you. And then there is the hybrid Ajax Ogre, which is even more ridiculous since it has both awesome damage output, as well as great rate of fire, accuracy, and low recoil. And this version in particular is leagues beyond what the Borderlands 2 Ogre is capable of. And I've got to say that if you can manage to get an Ajax Ogre to drop off of Ajax, then you're going to have your hands on what is probably the best gun in Borderlands 1. Hopefully, if Gearbox decides to include the Ogre in Borderlands 3, they will approximate the Ogre from Borderlands 1 rather than the version that we've seen in Borderlands 2. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.